Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. My name is Steph and I am broadcasting from a very warm, very sun-kissed Dragon Hall in Norwich, home to the National Centre for Writing. In this episode of The Writing Life, we are joined by Melissa Fu, a writer and friend of NCW who teaches on our online fiction course for NCW Academy. Melissa is speaking with my colleague Vicki about the difficult and elusive challenge of writing your second novel. Melissa's debut novel, Peach Blossom Spring, was a BBC Radio 2 book club pick. Her writing appears in several publications, including The Lonely Crowd, International Literature Showcase, Bear Fiction, Wasafiri Online, and the Willowherb Review. In 2019, her debut poetry pamphlet was published by the Hedgehog Poetry Press. Melissa is teaching on our 12-week online tutored course called How to Write Fiction, which begins this September. This podcast is an excellent sneak peek into the kinds of practical advice and guidance that Melissa will offer on this course, so I think it's a great introduction to her writing and teaching style. Have a listen to the podcast, and if you'd like the opportunity to learn more from Melissa, head over to nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk/academy and click on our online tutored courses. Right, so strap in as Melissa and Vicki discuss how Melissa's experience of writing her second book has differed from writing her first novel. They'll also touch on Melissa's journey into writing, her daily writing routine, and the challenges she has faced since publication. I hope this will be a valuable insight for anyone bravely embarking on book 2. And now I'll hand over to Vicki in conversation with Melissa Fu.
Hi Melissa, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Hi Vicki. It's really sunny, and in the background you might hear an ice cream truck. So, yeah.
Really atmospheric. I'm in Dragon Hall, which is very, very hot today. It's one of the kind of blessings and curses of these old medieval buildings is that in the winter it's freezing cold, and in the summer it gets very, very hot. Yes, I'm melting today, but it's lovely to see the sun. So today I wanted to talk to you a bit about your writing process and how this has changed and adapted over time. I want to go right back to when you first began to write and talk about how writing felt and how writing happened then. And then we're going to pull all the way through to what you're working on now and how that feels and how that happens today. So kind of really how your writing process has changed over time. Particularly, I want to kind of compare your first novel, Peach Blossom Spring, and how that felt to write with whatever it is you're working on now. So I want to start right at the very beginning of your writing life and ask you when you first began to write.
So I always really liked writing, and I have a funny little I just unearthed this recently, a funny little book from when I was in first or second grade that I wrote my first book, and it's about animals playing at the park. But I had a brilliant teacher who she really encouraged all the kids to do things, and then she had an old-fashioned typewriter, and she would type our little stories in a book, and then we could illustrate them. So my first novel written and illustrated was 1977 or 78 or something like that. So, but then I think, on a slightly more serious note, I studied English literature at university, and I always liked to write. Writing papers was okay. I liked to read. I think the writing that eventually became creative writing for many years took the form of keeping a journal, and that's something I still do. So, I have one right here next to me, that I write in longhand, and so wherever I was in life, because I didn't always stay studying just English. I studied physics. I taught physics. I taught English. I did all sorts of things, almost anything but writing. But in the background, I was always keeping a journal. I think that's where it all began for me. It's just sort of a reflexive thing to do, and a muscle for don't know what I think about something, I'll write about it. So
Do you tend to journal quite organically, or do you have a structure and a routine? So like, is it the first thing you open up at the start of the day, the last thing you do at night, or is it just very kind of fluid throughout the day?
It really has varied over time. I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about the podcast that we get to do today is thinking about how my writing process and a big boy has varied over time. And if we take journaling as a small thing that has like a through line that's always been there, I think it used to be I would write when I didn't understand something or I was confused or sad. So it would be very sporadic. And that's sort
Yeah.
of, teens, 20s, that kind of
Yeah.
writing. But then I for quite a while I would write first thing in the morning, when I started to really take writing a little bit more seriously, and the idea that you just show up at the page and it's a muscle, and whether or not you publish what you write is less important than the fact that you do write.
Yeah.
So for several years, I was quite disciplined about usually writing first thing in the morning for 20 or 30 minutes. And then we got a dog. And now I have to go take care of him. So it's become a little less regular. But I find that if I don't, I start to get confused. So it's not, I no longer have the regimented time blocked out that time of day, but I do make time during the day. And if it's not every day, it's okay. But it's, most days I'll write down something.
And do you ever use things that are in your journal in your fiction writing, or is it very much just an outlet for other thoughts and how you're feeling about writing, perhaps, or about the day?
It's a big bin of everything. And anything from to-do lists to thoughts about characters to just thoughts about writing, thoughts about people, and it's completely disorganized, and I like it that way. Like if I try to have a journal that's just for a project, for example, then I get a little bit precious about it. Think,
Yeah.
I can't write down this thought unless I'm in that journal. Or if I'm in this journal, I can't write down another thought. So because it's such a playground, I don't worry about it. Then I go back later and I'll decide if there are things that might be relevant for my work in progress or not. And during the writing and the development of my first book, I started to do something which I continue, which I'll be writing in my journal, and I can be writing about anything or nothing. I'll be writing about me today, where I'm going to walk the dog or something. And then a thought might occur to me about a character in the story. And so I just draw a line, and then I would put, say, the character's name, a main character in Peach Blossom Spring is called Maylin. So I'd put an M with a circle around it, and then I'd write whatever thought I had about her. And it might be a thought of hers, it might be a bit of dialogue. And if it was flowing, I would just continue. And if other characters came in, then I would put their names, an X with a circle or an R. And then when I go back through my journal, as a visual signal, I can flip through the pages, and I can show you one here, although I know we're on a podcast. You can see, when I'll flip through and I'll see, suddenly I'll start to see circles. And
Yeah.
I'm talking about my work in progress. So then I can go back there, and then I know that's something that I'm wanting to eventually transcribe. But then there's stuff like, there's nothing, it's just my thought. So I think if I tried to be disciplined about it, it would kill the spontaneity.
Yeah, and thinking of Peach Blossom Spring, when did you realize that what you were working on was a book? Did it come out of your journal? Had it existed in your mind before that? What was your intentions? I think is what I'm trying to ask when you first started working on the book that became Peach Blossom Spring.
It started as a short story. And the short story started as something that my mom said that just stopped me in my tracks about my dad growing peach trees and getting these wonderful peaches off of his trees. And that doesn't sound like a thing that would stop a person in their tracks. People grow fruit trees, and if you plant a tree, if you plant a fruit tree, you expect to have fruit. But this was not the case growing up with my dad. And when he finally did, later in life, he managed to kind of pretty much accidentally grow some peach trees. I just thought it was the most marvelous thing. So I tried to write about it, and it was a short story. I just couldn't quite get it. I couldn't get it to work. It was longer than anything I had written, and it still wasn't. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. And I think I hadn't ever thought before that I could actually write a whole novel. I would sort of finish after about 2,000 words. I'm like, wow, that's really long.
Yeah.
And somehow with this story, I thought, well, what if I just let this be as big as it wants to be? What if I just let it? And what if I write about anything that I think could be relevant for these trees and why it matters so much to me that my dad finally grew peach trees? And then it was sort of like it kind of got a life of its own, and I got more ideas, and I thought, well, what about this? And there was much more to write. So a lot of the ideas again did start off in journals,
Yeah.
in that space of journaling where I thought I'm going to write about whatever I want. But when I go back and I look through the journals, what is finally on the page is pretty different from
Yeah.
some of those scribbles. But at least that's where it started, and it felt like kind of a safe and low stakes place to start, because who writes an entire novel these days by hand in a journal? Like a few centuries
Yeah.
ago, yes. But now you can say, well, I'm just exploring this, and I'm going to see where it goes. And I think that takes some of the pressure off, instead of opening up a Word document and say, okay, page 1, chapter 1, here we go.
So at what point did you make that leap to open the Word document? At what point did it come off a handwritten page and into something that perhaps felt a bit more real?
I guess it was starting to get bigger and bigger, this short story. And by this time, I knew it was going to be more than just peach trees, but about my father's life. And he's Chinese. And so understanding China. And I think I was looking for other stories of people who would have been his contemporaries, who had told their lives, told stories about their lives, because he wouldn't ever. And I came across a writer called David T.K. Wong, and he was a little bit older than my father, and some of his stories were a little bit similar. So I was interested in his work. And then it turned out that he sponsored a fellowship in Norwich at the University of East Anglia for people who were writing book length works of fiction about East Asia. And then I thought, what if this is crazy, but maybe I'll just apply, because, what if this is a book, and what if maybe I'll just apply for that? And what you needed to do to apply, I think there was like a 500-word description of your project. And I thought, all right, if it's a book, what does it look like? What's a synopsis? And I applied to that. It cost about £10. And I thought, if £10 gets me a synopsis, that would be great. And I think that sort of is where it started to take shape. Like, oh, I could say this much. The application went in sort of, I think, February or March. And I just still kept writing and kept writing. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can get enough words that could be a novel. I think that was kind of the impetus, seeing that. And then just as it was getting bigger, thinking, can I write 80,000 words? So I challenged myself to see if I could get that many words. And then it very fortunately turned out that I was offered the fellowship. So then I was like, okay, now I really do have to write. So that was quite, there was a little bit of serendipity in finding this fellowship, and that it was so close to where I live here in Cambridge. It wasn't so far to go to Norwich. And then maybe that faith that the committee had in the idea I had for my story, them saying, yeah, this could be a book. Then
Yeah.
right, take the chance and put everything into it and try to see if I can get a manuscript by the end of the year. So.
And how did the synopsis that you submitted, I'm interested, is that still the synopsis of the book today, or how has that changed over your writing of it?
Very broadly speaking, I stuck to those words, which is a really interesting thing, and maybe we can talk a bit more about that, synopsis before writing the whole book. So I kind of had these sort of 3 acts, 3 main parts, and 3 main characters. And what was in that 500-word synopsis, I'd say, are kind of the tent poles of the whole book, the main things that have to happen. I knew what I was aiming at for the end. I knew sort of where I was beginning, and some of the things sort of happen along the way. I think, of course, the book was, since it's 100,000 words or so, it's much more than a 500-word synopsis.
Yeah.
So there was a lot. I think a lot of the sub themes and more minor characters or minor stories became really interesting to me as I wrote and researched. I didn't know that they were going to become so important, but the tent poles were there. Yeah, it's recognizable. I think if you look at the synopsis and you look at the book, you can say, yeah, these are related.
And how does it compare to the blurb, as it were? It's like are the tent poles of the synopsis the same selling points of the book? That seems a bit kind of, selling points feels a bit crass in a way, but you know what I mean, the kind of the things that publishers and agents are looking out for, did they ring true?
Yeah, the what you put on the back to see if people want to read it, in that sense. Yeah. I mean, and actually I think it's not so crass if you think about it that way, like the selling point, the blurb. It's what, when you pick it up, does that 1 paragraph or kind of 2 tiny paragraph description hold up to the reader's expectations, so when they read the book they don't feel cheated? I think so. That blurb was so hard to write. And lots of people had goes at fixing and tweaking, and it was very slightly different in the US and the UK, which is interesting. I think that what happened, I think it matches. Again, they're all related, right? So you've got the synopsis that does resemble the whole story, and then you've got to go on the other side of, after you've written the whole story, then it's like almost reverse engineering, you write the blurb. I think what shifts into the blurb, and maybe has even shifted now that the book has been out and people have read it, is the character I mentioned, Mei Lin. I don't think I realized that she was a main character or the main character as I was writing it. I was really focused on the next 2 generations, the son, who's modeled after my father, and his daughter, loosely modeled after me, although but really she's become from just the general feedback I've had, she's the main character. And even, for example, the Italian cover has a picture of a woman, like focusing on her, and the book has so it's shifted a little bit. When I wrote it, I wouldn't have said I'm writing a book about this amazing woman, but she turned out to be she kind of stole the story from me as I went, which is fine. I'm glad she did. So.
And going back to the kind of synopsis, I'm really interested in you almost using that then as your starting point and as the building blocks and the framework of the longer piece, because I know there's a big debate in the writing world about whether you plot it out or whether you go by the seat of your pants and just kind of write what comes out of you. So I guess I'm interested in that process for you and how you found it working in that way, and then also if that has changed at all as you're working towards a second novel.
So that synopsis for that story, the first story, that seemed quite solid and or had legs. It was the basis of the fellowship, or being awarded the fellowship. It was kind of the basis of how I got my agent. I shared the same synopsis with her, and she offered me representation ahead of my completing the manuscript. So I think, for whatever reason, when I sat down and said, if this story is a book, what does it look like? And I wrote that synopsis. And I mean, it took about a month just working just on that 500 words to get that synopsis. Yeah. So it wasn't just like, okay, write it. So, I really took some time with that. It had enough both solidity and momentum to carry the whole book. the second book, or my current project, I've tried the same thing, but I don't know that it's working. So, okay, if it's a book, what does it look like? And I wrote a synopsis again, and I shared it with my agent. She says, sounds really, what a lovely synopsis, start to write it. And it's not working the same way. And I'm not sure why. I've written a lot. I stick with the synopsis, but somehow it doesn't have quite the momentum. And I'm sort of thinking maybe I'm trying to pull the same trick again, and it's not this is a different book, and I think I need a different doorway in. This is a very relatively recent realization that I'm sharing with you right now. I don't think it's a bad idea to have a synopsis to start off with. I think if I plot in too much detail, then I feel like I've already written the story, and so I don't, because I'm like, well, why bother? It's all I've done it, So I think that there might not be a particular way that always works. I think it might depend with every single project.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the kind of trope of the difficult second novel, like the difficult second album, it's something that exists across all creative forms, doesn't it? And it's interesting to think about the reasons why that is, whether it's about kind of process driven, whether it's something to do with the way in which the idea has come to the creative, the author or the musician or whoever, in the first place. Because I feel, as you were saying, your first novel came from one very kind of key core sentence or a key core image and a realization and the feelings that had in you. How has this second, I know you probably won't be able to tell us too much about it, but how has this second novel came to you? What was the driving force?
So the second one, I think, if we can just go back for a second about the idea you were talking about, the difficult second novel, or this second album trope, and I've been thinking a little bit about that, and have an idea about that, and then I'll talk about
of course
my current project. But I wonder, so having been a scientist, or even anyone who has had to do a science class, through school, you often have to plot things and make a line, right?
Yeah.
And you need 2 points to make a line, right? And so that second novel, I wonder, or that second album, second piece, I wonder if some of the anxiety wrapped up in that for everyone is it going to define your line, or or is it going to be an outlier? You don't know. Like, once you've got 3, then you know if the second one was on the right track or if it was an outlier. But so I think that that's some of the unknown bound up in it.
Yeah.
And along that line, I don't know what I'm like. So the Peach Blossom Spring was historical fiction. So does that mean novel 2 should be historical fiction? Or if I decide I don't want it to be historical fiction, what am I risking by going outside that expectation, that I write in a similar genre or with similar concerns?
Yeah.
And so there was a second project, 2 asterisk or project 1.5, between the one I'm working on now, that I started, and it kind of fell in the line of, it was a historical fiction. It was a similar time period. It was Chinese diaspora. And then I thought, you know what? I've said what I want to say at this point in my life about all those topics.
Yeah.
So although this call it 2-star idea is, or 2 asterisk, although I could imagine a really interesting novel on it, it's not the novel I want to write. So I put it aside.
Yeah.
So then I went back to, and that was about a year's worth of really considering the idea, taking it seriously and doing a lot of research. So then I went kind of back and thought, well, what made it so necessary that I write the book that became Peach Blossom Spring? Like, what stopped me in my tracks? And so then I thought, well, what are other things that I just feel really passionate about, or what will I regret not having written about? And so then I got onto the topic that I'm currently working, but I don't know if I've made it now too precious again, because if I don't do it, if I don't do it justice while I feel really sad. So what's informing my current work in progress is it's about New Mexico.
Yeah.
Which is where I grew up, and it's about the landscape, which I love. And at the moment, everything else is in flux. And that's after, quite a lot of synopses, chapters, different starts going in. So I think it's very fair to say that I am struggling with the second novel.
Yeah. I'm sure you are not the only writer to be currently in that position, nor the only writer to have ever experienced that. How long have you been working on something that isn't Peach Blossom Spring? So whether we're talking about, novel 1.5 or this current work in progress, because Peach Blossom Spring was published a couple of years ago now. So have you been working on it working on something since then? Was it before then? Because there's sometimes can be quite a long gap, can't there, between finishing a work and it existing in the world?
Yeah. So I, sort of finished my last edits on Peach Blossom Spring in 2021.
Yeah.
And then it came out so it was March or April 2021. It came out in March 2022.
Yeah.
And I guess you could say from then until now, I've been working on something new. But it's such an exciting thing to write a whole book. I think that's a lot of the momentum and the propelling action of a first novel. It's like, can I do it? Can I do it?
Yeah.
And you do it. And then it comes out. And I just, there is a conventional wisdom saying, well, work as much as you can on your second project before your first book comes out, because you're going to be so busy, and try to get really sunk in. But there was a part of me that thought, you know what, against conventional wisdom, I'm going to enjoy everything about this first book, because there's no guarantee that there will be another book. And what is this, what's it like to work with a publisher and work with an editor? And what's it like to get to go to events or get to talk with people on a podcast, and I'm not, despite having done several things in my life, I've realized I'm not very good at doing two things at once. So maybe because I've tried to do two things at once for too often. So I think the kind of real focus on the current project, and without being distracted by all the wonderful things about having a book out like Peach Blossom Spring, I think that focus, I could maybe mark it from early 2023. So I'd say I'm about 18 months in on really giving this my creative attention.
And how, if you think about 18 months into Peach Blossom Spring, can you identify differences in how you're feeling, or similarities in how you're feeling?
Yeah, so Peach Blossom Spring, 18 months after I decided, that was like 2018, January 2018, after I thought, okay, I'm going to apply for this fellowship, I'm going to write as much as I can. 18 months later, I really did have a full draft that then I fixed over the summer. 24 months later, we sold it. So, and I realize now that's really quick. But one could argue that it was really quick, preceded by 48 years of existence, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing about first novels is they kind of, you put everything, or at least I put everything into that first one, and almost everything. So this one, what do I have? I have probably two different separate-ish documents of up to 80 to 100,000 words, but I think I'm trying to do a lot more as a writer, and I'm also I've got different preoccupations. So Peach Blossom Spring, the question was, can I do this?
Yeah.
And then when I had some of the support, it's like, I have to do this. There's, I would feel terrible if I didn't try to make the most of the opportunity I had been given. And I told quite a linear story, because it was already so complex, all the history. I just thought, I'm going to start in 1938 and I'm going to go straight through. I'm not going to mess around with too much like time structure. And and then I just knew from the beginning, okay, it's going to be third person and it's present tense. And I just went with that.
Yeah.
This one, I'm trying to do different things. And so it hasn't settled because I'm thinking, oh, well, how do I want to handle time? And do I want two narrators? And how about pacing? So I think my bar, my own personal bar for what I want the writing to do is higher.
Yeah.
I think before I just wanted it to exist. And maybe I should take that bar down and just make it exist.
Yeah. Be a bit kinder to yourself in the writing of it.
Yeah, and then like, okay, that's what editing is for. You can fix all those things. So.
What you were saying about kind of the I don't know if this is the word linearness of Peach Blossom Spring. I was really interested actually in how you wrote that. If you went, as you say, from 1938 forwards, or whether in the writing of it you were able to jump around to different characters, different voices, because you knew it was going to be this chronological thing in the end.
I think early on I jumped around a lot.
Yeah.
Because I knew, like you say, I knew that eventually I was just going to tell it straight. So to get the draft down, I remember I had a document at one point called 30 Scenes in, and the original title was Henry Dreams an Orchard. So it was called 30 Scenes in Henry Dreams an Orchard. And there were just 30 things that I thought should happen somewhere in the book.
Yeah.
And I would just move to whichever one seemed the most interesting to write at the time. And then by the end, there were more than 30 scenes.
Yeah.
And it was no longer called Henry Dreams an Orchard. But I think that was, I mean, and that maybe that returns a little bit to the playfulness that I was talking about in writing by hand. Where there was kind of less at stake. Just write what's interesting today.
Is that an approach that you've taken forward to your current work in progress? Do you have a similar document, or is it much more fluid even than that?
I have several. Now I have just like several scenes everywhere. I feel like I know this world and I know these characters. I think I'm trying to find a better way in. I've done two different starts trying to get into the story. One, once again, going very linearly in time, and then I tried about 9 chapters that way, and then I did a different starting kind of in the middle of the story.
Yeah.
And it's just evolving. I think it doesn't know what it wants to be. I don't know what it wants. Part of it is I don't know if I'm too close. Although which is a funny thing to say because it takes place in New Mexico and I'm not in New Mexico. So, but it's something kind of very close to memories. I'm going to be there for a little while, and I'm sort of thinking that's going to make a big difference. I was there earlier this summer, and while I was there, I kind of felt like I could feel the pillars shifting from what I had been working on.
Yeah, I'm interested in how being in a place where your work is set makes a difference to the writing of it, or if having that distance, either physical distance or the distance of time, impacts benefits or challenges the writing in different ways.
I think they're both really good to have both be the opportunity to be there and also the opportunity to step back, or the opportunity to. And what jumped to mind is different stretches in yoga, or sometimes you want to stretch one way to make for one set of muscles or one kind of flexibility, but you don't want just that one stretch. Then So I think they're both really important. Like Peach Blossom Spring, I couldn't have written without having been able to visit China and Taiwan.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I couldn't have written it if it was closer to my own story.
Yeah. And that's just, fascinating. the closeness and the distance and the different ways that plays out in the writing of a story. I'm also interested in whether you've written anything in between Peach Blossom Spring and your current work in progress that isn't a novel. So I know that before Peach Blossom Spring you were writing shorter fiction. Yeah, and I'm just interested in the things that aren't novels that you worked on and possibly are still working on, or if you're focused entirely on longer form fiction.
So a lot of what I'm using in this second project draws on work that I was writing before Peach Blossom Spring, which was a lot of more creative nonfiction, short form, small memoir-like pieces. And I had written, and in fact, when I first got my agent, she got in touch and she's like, "Are you working on anything long form?" And I wrote back, I said, "I have these two ideas. One is what then became Peach Blossom Spring, and the other is this set of short stories and kind of creative nonfiction essays about growing up in New Mexico."
Yeah.
And I told her about both, and I sent her sort of samples of both. She said, "Oh, I like both of these very much. I think I can sell the novel."
Yeah.
And also, I was getting more interested in seeing where that went. So to some extent, although what I've been working on is a return to what I was in at least in the topic and some of the preoccupations, it's a return to what I was working on before that book. It's also kind of a return of what made me want to write in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think, you open the podcast with a question of, have you always written, and what made you want to write? And I think what made me want to write here in the UK was not being in New Mexico and missing this land. And so I wrote as a sense of comfort, writing these stories to myself as much as anyone else, like about this landscape, these different things that I would do with my friends when we were kids, and it didn't even matter if anyone else read it. It was just so comforting because I couldn't be there in person. I would get there on the page.
Yeah.
I think this is a very roundabout way of saying I'm returning to what I was writing in the first place. Like, Peach Blossom Spring was an interruption. And it was an amazing one. And I loved it. And I loved having had that experience. I don't know that it won't repeat, because every book is its own thing. Yeah. Every project is its own thing. So maybe what I'm trying to figure out with this second book, because we don't know if it's a novel anymore.
No.
Is, maybe what I'm trying to do is trying to remember why I wrote, or what I was doing, and kind of bring kind of an end to the sentence that I started with, writing those stories, say it's kind of starting 2012, 2013, and whether or not they end up taking the form of a novel or collection of nonfiction or some mixture in between, I don't know. But I know it's about New Mexico.
Yeah. I think kind of that end of the sentence is actually a really beautiful way to end our podcast as well. And it's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Before we do go, is there anything that you want to say that we haven't yet covered about your writing process, about your second body of work, about your writing life, or anything that's coming up for you?
I guess I think the one thing that I'm learning and that I'm valuing is this word process. It's a process, not a project, not a product.
Yeah.
Maybe and maybe even the word could be practice, right? So and letting it evolve and trying to keep it interesting to myself. is, I think that's what this writing life is about for me.
Keeping things interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Melissa. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, it's been a joy. Thank you so much for inviting me, Vicki.
Hello, I'm back. A big thank you to Melissa and to Vicki for their time. If you've got any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. And don't forget to check out those online tutored courses over on nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk/academy. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation to support us today over on the website by clicking on the Support Us button. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to this podcast and leaving us a 5-star rating and a review, because it helps other people to find us. Thanks again, keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.